Okay, everybody. So I'd like to get started with the next session, which is titled Discover Japan from the Shogunate to the Shinkansen. And in this session, we have two speakers, Professor Philip Seaton from the University of Hokkaido and Dr. Christopher Hood from Cardiff University, both Japan experts, and they will be discussing different aspects of Japan's modern history. And I'm delighted to say that for this session, we have a special guest as moderator, which will be Jiro Kokuryo, who's a Vice President of Keio University, who are co-organising this event with the British Council today. So before we move on to the presentations, I'd like to ask Vice President Kokuryo to say a few words of introduction.
Well, welcome to Discover Japan from the Shogunate to the Shinkansen session. As introduced, my name is Jiro Kokuryo from Keio University, and we happen to be the host of this entire exhibition. So I'm really happy that you came. I'm going to try to be a very good timekeeper, so to allow as many questions as possible from the floor. I'm afraid that we can't take questions from upstairs. There's a room upstairs listening to us. So if anybody of you who upstairs that has burning desire for questions, please run down here. In this session, two Japan experts join us to discuss different aspects of Japan's modern history. Our first speaker is Professor Philip Seaton of Hokkaido University, who will examine the Bakumatsu period, which is 1853 to 1868, which are the final years of Tokugawa Shogunate and the age of the last samurai. This was a turbulent time of great change as Japan emerged from 200 years of self-imposed isolation. Professor Seaton will explain how the Bakumatsu period and its heroes, such as Sakamoto Ryoma and Shinsengumi, are romanticized today in hugely popular period dramas as tiger dramas. Professor Seaton will also show how these dramas have induced tourist booms in the locations featured in the programs. We then move to the 20th century as Dr. Christopher Hood of Cardiff University guides us through the history of Japan's beloved Shinkansen, the bullet train, from its planning period to during the Pacific War to its launch in 1964, which was just in time for the first Tokyo Olympics, and subsequent development into super sleek models in operation today. Dr. Hood will analyze the reasons for the Shinkansen's success and explain how it went from being simply a high-speed rail network to attaining the status of iconic national symbol. He will also comment on the regional differences in its design and usage, and how this in turn reflects the diversity of Japanese cultures today. Following the presentations, Keio University Vice President, which is me, Jiro Kokuryo, will lead the discussion with two scholars. And of course, after that, I will invite people from the audience to jump in and ask questions or make comments and have fun. Great. So if you excuse me, I will call you Philip. And who would you like to give your pitch? And please speak close to the microphone so that people upstairs can hear you.
Okay, first of all, it's a great honor to be here and lovely to see so many people here listening to the session. My name is Philip Seaton. My talk today is TV Dramas and Tourism, Japanese Historical Sites as Sustainable Tourist Resources. I'll start with a very, very quick self-introduction. I'm originally from London, but have spent most of the last 21 years living in Japan. So all of you people who want to go and study in Japan or work in Japan, be careful of what you wish for. I completed my DPhil in 2004, and I've been at Hokkaido University ever since. And I'm now convener of the Modern Japanese Studies program, which is a bachelor's degree. Okay, my talk today is based on a piece of research that was conducted as part of a major grant into what is called content tourism. And the full version of the research is available, open access, in Japan Forum, which is the official journal of the British Association for Japanese Studies. Now, contents tourism is when fans of works of popular culture, such as films, dramas, music, and novels, engage further with their favorite contents, namely narratives, locations, characters, and other creative elements, such as soundtracks, by traveling to places related to the contents. Examples include filming locations or events somehow related to works of popular culture. As part of our grant, we integrate our research into teaching on the Modern Japanese Studies program. And my main research partner, Professor Takeyoshi Yamamura, and I also take MJSP students each year to the Toyoko Manga Anime Festa in Hokkaido to meet fans and local people and to discuss how pop culture events can boost tourism and local revitalization efforts. So my paper today is as much tourism studies as it is history, but the overlap is very clear, I think. So the presentation looks at the tourism generated by NHK's Tiger dramas. So in my view, Tiger drama tourism is one of the most important examples in the world of film-induced and contents tourism. So the dramas are broadcast throughout the year to very large audiences. Furthermore, each of the approximately 50 episodes usually contains information about tourist sites that viewers may visit. So Tiger dramas are historical dramas. They focus on a main character, an actual historical figure usually. The result of these dramas being broadcast is an annual and predictable tourism boom. Today I'll look at two dramas, Shinsengumi, broadcast in 2004, and Ryomaden, broadcast in 2010. Both are set in the Bakumatsu period, both have Kyoto as an important location, and both feature very popular heroes who died immediately before or after the Meiji Restoration. Choosing these two dramas, therefore, allows much comparative analysis. So the table on the slide shows the estimated economic impacts of Tiger dramas from 2003 to 2011. As you can see, in the past decade, the total economic impact of these dramas has been calculated to be hundreds of billions of yen in increased tourism. The figures are estimates published by the Bank of Japan before the drama was broadcast. So we must treat these figures with a little bit of caution, but the figures involved are clearly enormous, and the booms are temporary in nature, lasting for the duration of the drama. After the drama has finished, typically tourism levels fall back down to what might be called normal levels. Our journey begins in Kyoto. It was the site of bloody battles in the 1860s between supporters and opponents of the Tokugawa Shogunate that had ruled Japan since the 1600s. Shinsengumi was established in 1863 to protect the shogun on a visit to the imperial capital. Furthermore, Sakamoto Ryoma was active there in the 1860s in the anti-Bakufu movement. For these reasons, much of Shinsengumi and Ryomaden were set in Kyoto. Now, the massive scale of the Kyoto tourism sector makes it impossible to see the effects of these dramas in aggregate tourism data. Tourism was steadily increasing in the 2000s. So in the year 2004, the year of the Shinsengumi drama, we cannot see a particular deviation from the long-term trend. In 2010, the year of Ryomaden, there is a sharp rise, but this cannot be attributed to the drama. This was recovery after the Lehman shock of 2008. However, there is clear evidence of the Tiger drama boom in visitor figures at the Ryozen Museum of History in Kyoto. This museum, as its Japanese title suggests, is about the Bakumatsu period. As you can see from the photo corner, Hijikata Toshizo and Sakamoto Ryoma are two of the key historical figures featured in this museum. It's also worth noting that the Ryozen Museum of History will attract many Sakamoto Ryoma fans because it is next to the Gokoku Shrine, or a nation-protecting shrine, which is where Sakamoto Ryoma's grave is located. Okay, here are visitor numbers to the museum between 2000 and 2011. The impact of the tiger dramas is very clear. There are large peaks in tourist numbers during the years that Shinsengumi and Ryomaden were broadcast. In addition, tourist numbers rise sharply in the year before the drama. The subject for the next drama is announced around 18 months before the drama is broadcast. So many people visit these sites in anticipation of the new drama. You can also see a massive fall in tourist numbers in the year following the drama. This shows how tiger drama-induced tourism lacks sustainability and is essentially a massive but only temporary boost to an existing tourist site. The Ryozen Museum of History was not the only place in Kyoto experiencing drama-induced tourism booms. Mibudera Temple was a base for Shinsengumi and contains the graves of a number of Shinsengumi members. There are no detailed records of visitor numbers, but when I went to the temple and spoke to staff there, they recollected busloads of tourists in 2004. Visitor levels then returned to normal after the drama ended. This is the familiar pattern that we see in tiger drama-induced tourism. Let us now turn to Hakodate in Hokkaido and the Shinsengumi boom there in 2004. Hakodate is where one of Shinsengumi's most popular members, Hijikata Toshizo, has been adopted as a local hero. He was the vice commander of Shinsengumi and died in Hakodate during the Battle of Hakodate in May 1869. He's commemorated in the exhibits in Goryokaku Tower. The tower overlooks Goryokaku Fort, and is the main site related to the Battle of Hakodate. Various newspaper reports suggest an increase in tens of thousands of visitors to Hakodate during the drama period. For example, the Hokkaido Shimbun newspaper reported that visitors to the Hijikata Takuboku Museum, a museum which also commemorates poet Ishikawa Takuboku, had doubled to around 60,000 compared to the previous year. But when we look at overall visitor figures to Hakodate, we can see little sign of the Shinsengumi boom. Overall visitor numbers to Hakodate actually declined. To understand this data, as with the aggregate data in Kyoto, we must see a much bigger picture. In the early 2000s, the trend was downwards anyway, but then in 2004, the autumn was also a poor tourist season. There were the knock-on effects of the devastating Chuetsu earthquake in October, and Typhoon 18 hit Hokkaido hard, including knocking down many of the trees on Hokkaido University's campus. There's also little clear evidence of the Shinsengumi boom at Goryokaku Tower. This is where we would expect very clear evidence of a Shinsengumi boom. The green bars in the middle are visitor numbers for 2004. It's a little difficult to see, but in only 3 months, April, November, and December, there was an increase in visitors compared to the previous year. In all other months, visitor numbers are dropping compared to the previous year. The really noticeable increase is in the light blue line, namely starting in April 2006. However, this increase has nothing to do with the TV drama. On the 1st of April 2006, a new, taller tower was opened to replace the original tower. Visitors flocked to see the new tower, especially in May during the Golden Week holiday period and during the Goryokaku festival. Putting all this data together, we must conclude that there was a Shinsengumi boom in 2004, but its main effect was to slow down a broader decline in tourist numbers to Hakodate. Let us return to the aggregate data again for a moment. We can see something quite interesting happening in 2010. There's a sharp rise in visitors. The rise was partly because of the opening of a reconstruction of the Hakodate Magistrate's office in Goryokaku Fort. But does the rise by any chance also have something to do with Ryomaden? It might seem a crazy question, but actually it's not. There is a museum about Sakamoto Ryoma in Hakodate, which opened in 2009. It's called the Hokkaido Sakamoto Ryoma Museum. Why is it in Hakodate? Well, part of Ryoma's vision for post-Bakufu Japan was the colonization of Hokkaido, and some of his relatives even moved here to Hokkaido in the late 19th century. The museum celebrates Ryoma's Hokkaido connections. In its first 15 months of operation to February 2011, it had 75,000 visitors. In other words, roughly 60,000 of the 254,000 increase in tourists in 2010 can be attributed to this new museum. Of these, many visitors were influenced by Ryomaden. Let us now look at the Shinkansen. Shinkansen is Chris's topic. I won't steal your topic. The Shinsengumi boom in Hino, Tokyo. Hino is where a number of Shinsengumi members, including Hijikata Toshizo, came from. The Bank of Japan did not do an economic impact survey in Hino, despite its clear importance as a Shinsengumi site, and some evidence of a Shinsengumi boom. However, such a survey would have revealed very marginal effects of the boom in Hino. The key reason for this, the reason why there's very little economic impact, is the city's location. Hino is within the Tokyo metropolitan area. Very few tourists go to Hino, and therefore there are very few hotels in the city. So while the Shinsengumi Festa and other events attracted nearly 300,000 people, most were day trippers. In other words, they simply paid entrance fees to Shinsengumi sites and perhaps bought lunch or dinner locally. The rest of the economic impact, coming from transport and accommodation, is lost in the overall economy of the greater Tokyo area. The second issue concerns the type of sites that can be visited. There are a few small museums in Hino, like the Hijikata Toshizo Museum and the Inoue Genzaburo Museum. These are of high interest and value to Shinsengumi fans because they are run by the descendants of the Shinsengumi members. But they are only open a few days a month and charge nominal entrance fees. They're certainly not run for any significant economic motives. And unlike the Ryozen Museum of History in Kyoto or Goryokaku Tower in Hakodate, the main tourist site to Shinsengumi in Hino today was not open at the time of the drama. The home of the Shinsengumi Historical Museum opened in 2005. Since opening, this museum has attracted about 10,000 visitors a year. This translates into a negligible economic benefit for the city. Given that adults only pay 200 yen to enter, the entrance fees for 1 year do not even cover the annual salary of one member of staff. In the case of Hino, we must conclude that despite having prime tourist assets relating to Shinsengumi, the city has not or cannot convert the assets into a profitable tourism sector. The tourism sector exists primarily to promote local identity, history, and pride. The city heavily subsidizes any film-induced tourism relating to the Shinsengumi. The final location I will look at is Kochi, and the impact of the Ryomaden boom on Sakamoto Ryoma's home prefecture. In Sakamoto Ryoma's hometown of Kochi, there are many sites relating to him, including a large statue at Katsurahama Beach, the Sakamoto Ryoma Memorial Museum, and a temporary structure in front of Kochi Station where you can see the sets used during the shooting of Ryomaden. We saw at the beginning of the talk that Ryomaden had an economic impact that dwarfs all other tiger dramas. There was a tripling in the number of visitors to the 4 main sites related to Ryoma in Kochi. And not included in the above figures are the 924,000 people who visited the Ryoma Expo at various sites throughout the prefecture. Why was the tourism boom induced by Ryomaden so large? Well, the main factor underpinning the boom was the massive popularity of Ryoma himself. But the Ryomaden boom was also large because it generated many overnight visits to Kochi, and therefore spending on food and accommodation, as well as at the tourist sites. There was also a massive Ryoma boom in Nagasaki, where his Kaientai trading company operations were based. There is a small museum to visit and a statue of Ryoma at the end of the Ryoma Road walking trail. For a number of reasons, therefore, the Ryomaden boom was probably the #1 film-induced tourism in Japan to date. If we believe the Bank of Japan figures, in Kochi alone it amounted to a staggering 2.4% of prefectural GDP in 2010. So I've looked at the Shinsengumi and Ryomaden booms in 4 localities: Kyoto, Hakodate, Hino, and Kochi. The evidence from these 4 examples, these 4 cities, is that historical television dramas can trigger massive tourism booms by fans of the drama to existing heritage sites. However, the key is creating a sustainable tourism industry. This can be achieved by establishing tourism business models according to visitor numbers in normal years, rather than years in which dramas are broadcast. TV drama-induced booms should only ever be considered as a boost to an existing industry and not as a reason to establish a new industry. Having said this, very popular historical figures such as Sakamoto Ryoma and Shinsengumi members are regularly featured in historical dramas. Therefore, the tourism industry should be prepared to take advantage of these periodic booms. Destinations need to provide enough reasons for people to stay overnight. This is when interest in local historical figures really converts into significant local economic impacts. So in conclusion, the enduring popularity of figures such as Sakamoto Ryoma and Hijikata Toshizo have made them immensely valuable tourism resources to local communities. Given their popularity over a period of over 140 years, we can assume that sites related to them will continue to provide a sustainable source of tourism revenues for many years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. There are many questions I'd like to ask, but let me hold that until we have Professor Hood's, Chris talk about Shinkansen.
Thank you very much. When we think of Japan, a number of images such as these may come to mind. These are what we could call symbols or icons of Japan. But there is one image and one icon which for the last 51 years has become synonymous with Japan. For over 50 years, the Shinkansen has been transporting people across Japan punctually, quickly, comfortably, and safely. The original plans, and indeed some of the construction, actually date back to the 1930s when the Shinkansen was started to be developed. Indeed, it's from this period that we even get the term bullet train, went from the term Dangan Resha, the original steam train which would have run along this line. But during the 1940s, construction stopped and did not restart until the 1950s. When services began on the 1st of October 1964, in time for the Tokyo Olympics, it heralded a new age in railway transport. It was a bold step taken by Japan, as many other nations were investing in roads and aviation. Japan's success story with the Shinkansen led many other nations to reevaluate their usage of railways, and the lessons are still being learnt today, with many countries considering importing Shinkansen technology directly. Not only is the image a much-used image of Japan, it is also the image of the Shinkansen which is used more often than not when talking about high-speed trains, although there are other trains, including faster ones, around the world. But the Shinkansen is more than just a train, and its story is more than just one of engineering and technical developments. Over the years, the Shinkansen has, for most Japanese people, gone from being something to marvel about to normalcy. It is taken for granted in much the same way as rice cookers, TVs, and computers may be. This makes it a wonderful tool by which to study aspects of Japanese society. This is further enhanced due to the regional differences in its designs and usage that have resulted from the breakup and privatization of the national railways in 1987. What we can see today is a reflection of the diversity of Japanese cultures. This talk will guide you through some of these differences, explaining what we can learn from this and pointing out what you can look out for on your own journeys on the Shinkansen to make the journeys an even greater experience. It is perhaps no surprise that, at times, the Japanese have pointed to the significance of the Shinkansen. It has been voted the most significant invention of the post-war period. And here, its development and evolution is linked with the development of Tokyo and the country. though we have to note its influence has not always been positive and always been what was expected. But actually, it's not just in Japan where its image is used. The Shinkansen's image even appears on the posters for this very exhibition, and I assure you that this has absolutely nothing to do with me whatsoever, because actually it's been used in the posters for previous year's exhibitions, as I commented on in my book, Japan: The Basics. This map shows the Shinkansen network at present. Note how Tokyo-centric Japan is. All of the lines seemingly connect the country to the capital. This is no surprise. The main cities of the Kanto Plain account for about a third of the country's population. Nearly a half of all businesses in Japan have their headquarters in Tokyo. Of course, the way Japan has developed is, in part, due to the topography of the country itself, and Japan lends itself to having a relatively small number of heavily used intercity transport links. In terms of the operation of the Shinkansen, they are operated by different companies due to the breakup of Japan National Railways, JNR, in 1987 into 6 regionally based passenger companies and 1 nationwide freight company. Whilst currently 4 JR companies have Shinkansen, as we can see from this figure, the Shinkansen is not of equal significance, at least in terms of income for the 4 companies. Whilst the Shinkansen is at the heart of everything that JR Tokai does, the same cannot be said for other companies where conventional railways may be of equal or greater significance. The relative significance of the Tokaido Shinkansen, the line between Tokyo and Osaka, is perhaps best demonstrated by the next figure. The Tokaido Shinkansen accounts for over 40% of all passengers carried by the Shinkansen across Japan. This figure jumps up to around 3/4 if we take into account the distance each passenger goes. Each Tokaido Shinkansen train can hold around 1,200 passengers. That's the equivalent of 2 or 3 Boeing 747s or 777s. There are also up to 15 trains per hour in each direction. Imagine 45 additional flights between Tokyo and Osaka every hour. The differences in passenger volumes from the Shinkansen naturally is a reflection of the differences in markets that these lines and the companies serve. Perhaps it should be no surprise to see that the trains and companies themselves also come to reflect these differences. Until the Hokkaido Shinkansen opens next March, there are 4 operating companies, and we'll now look at each of these in turn. Of the 4 JR companies that currently operate Shinkansen, JR Tokai is perhaps the most well-known internationally, for it operates the original Shinkansen line. Although the corporate color for the company is orange, the color does not feature on its Shinkansen, with the company preferring to use the traditional white color with some form of blue stripe. Using white sends out a very clear signal that the company is hardworking and dedicated to good service, for trains of this color are hard to keep clean. But more than this, the choice of colors speaks to the conservatism of the company. The most radical thing that JR Tokai has ever done to its Shinkansen is to have the words "Ambitious Japan" written on some Shinkansen around the time of the opening of a new Shinagawa Shinkansen station over 10 years ago. Over time, the company has limited the types of Shinkansen, and although they may be manufactured by more than one company, the impression given by JR Tokai is uniformity. JR West operates the Sanyo Shinkansen between Shin Osaka and Hakata, and also the section of the Hokuriku Shinkansen between Itoigawa and Kanazawa. The Sanyo Shinkansen is in many respects an extension of the Tokaido Shinkansen, and some services will continue between the 2 lines, although all crew will change over at Shin Osaka. Along the Sanyo Shinkansen, compared to JR Tokai, we see a much greater variety of rolling stock. Although the designs are predominantly the same as would have been found on the Tokaido Shinkansen, the length of the trains themselves may be significantly shorter, and they may be used for much longer. Both of these facts point to JR West serving smaller cities, where the demand for Shinkansen is lower than that on the Tokaido Shinkansen. We also see on this line that although using the same type of rolling stock as JR Tokai, JR West will often use a greater variation in colours, although only those which are white with a blue stripe will through run onto the Tokaido Shinkansen. The only exception historically to this was the 500 series Shinkansen, which can be seen in the top left-hand picture, which was for a time the fastest train in the world. JR West's corporate colour is a shade of blue and is seen on some of its Shinkansen. The opening of the Hokuriku Shinkansen extension between Nagano and Kanazawa also sees a similar handover between JR West and JR East, with the W7 Shinkansen used for through running. JR East has an identical Shinkansen but calls it an E7. Along the Sanyo Shinkansen there are many tunnels. There have been two problems with these. First, problems with their construction led to some parts of the tunnels actually collapsing in the 1990s, so that all tunnels had to be inspected and repaired. Second, the speed of the trains was such that it caused a sonic boom by the exit of the tunnel. Over the years, JR West has installed hoods with slats in by the entrance of many tunnels to help reduce the noise impact on those living near the line, as you can see in the bottom right-hand picture. Just as the Sanyo Shinkansen is effectively an extension of the Tokaido Shinkansen, so the Kyushu Shinkansen is effectively an extension of the Sanyo Shinkansen. This was not always the way. Initially, it was the southern section of the line that opened, but on the 12th of March 2011, the full line opened. The news of its opening was overshadowed by the Great East Japan earthquake, but the video of its opening did become a worldwide hit on YouTube. With the whole line opened, there is also through running between the Kyushu Shinkansen and Sanyo Shinkansen, with crew changing at Hakata, but there is no through running to the Tokaido Shinkansen. Although there are less designs of trains, we see JR Kyushu's eye to detail, which has become a familiar feature of many of their conventional trains also. Indeed, one of the company's mottos is, "Good design is good business." So in the Shinkansen, you can find traditional-looking bamboo curtains for the windows and noren curtains in areas around the toilets. You also see a greater use of wood and more Japanese-style patterns on the seats, which vary between carriages. But we see limited use of the corporate colour, red. In reflecting local demands, we also see at the Sendai maintenance facility something not found at any of the other Shinkansen companies, a machine to clean off volcanic ash from the trains due to the challenges presented from the ever-active Sakurajima in Kagoshima. Let us now turn our attention to JR East. It has 3 main lines and also 2 mini Shinkansen lines where there are level crossings, for example, so the trains run at lower speeds. However, trains from all of these lines have to share the same section of track between Tokyo and Omiya, which is a relatively slow section of track, and so, together with the limited number of platforms at Tokyo Station, is a bottleneck on trying to increase services. The 3 main Shinkansen lines are also very different to each other. The Tohoku Shinkansen not only connects the northern cities on Japan's northeast coast, it also provides a link to Hokkaido, which will be enhanced by the opening of the first section of the Hokkaido Shinkansen. The line also provides links to the 2 mini Shinkansen, and trains from these lines will often link with the Tohoku Shinkansen, so that effectively only one train has to use the section between Tokyo and Omiya. This is not the only time that trains get linked. The double-decker E4 Shinkansen was designed to provide high-capacity service over distances of up to 200 kilometers from Tokyo, which is considered to be commutable distance on the Shinkansen. For peak times of the day, 2 of these Shinkansen may be linked. Such a train has a capacity of over 1,600 people, making it the highest capacity high-speed train in the world. As with JR West, we see quite a variation of colours being used. But as with the other companies, we do not see much use of the corporate colour, green, although some shades of green have been used, as with the E5 Shinkansen, which is currently the fastest train in Japan. Whilst JR Kyushu has to contend with a volcano, JR East has to deal with snow. For example, on the Joetsu Shinkansen, the snow is wet and heavy, so sprinklers are used to clear and keep services running on time. There really are different types of snow, by the way. Of course, all the companies also have to contend with typhoons and earthquakes. Special sensors are in place to help detect earthquakes, and infrastructure continues to be improved to help. That the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake had so little impact on the Shinkansen is testament to how well these systems work. But let us now take a step inside the Shinkansen and see it at work. It would be easy for me to show a photograph to show how punctual a Shinkansen is, but I find a video is far more powerful, as you can see also how calm and organized it is, as well as the train being so close to schedule for a long period of time, rather than me merely managing to capture a photograph at the best moment.
信号230
The clock in the middle there shows how close to schedule it is. You can see it wavering between 1 and 0 seconds.
Shingo 220 3秒円通定通です。徐行の制限確認。15名静岡掛川間徐行なしの制限なし。停車通過の確認。掛川通過57分45秒。
The average delay on the Tokaido Shinkansen is less than 10 seconds. As you watch the video, you may have noticed a small pocket watch on the dashboard. Despite the existence of digital clocks, there is space on the dashboard for the driver to put the pocket watch which they receive when they join the company. Such time devices are not always found on British trains, where drivers may receive a clock as a retirement present. But if you thought that video was impressive, please watch the next one, where we see the driver bring the train to a stop at exactly the correct point along the platform. If the video works. Oh. Okay, so the video's not working, I'm afraid. If the video had worked, we would have seen that as the train went along the platform, he has to stop the train by himself. There is no automation. Okay, there is an automated system to sort of kick in if the driver doesn't do what he's supposed to be doing. But in reality, the London Underground, particularly the Central Line, is far more automated than the Shinkansen is. Okay. Okay. Oh, there we go. Again, you can see the pocket watch built into the middle of the dashboard. The driver has a target of where he needs to park. He has to be within 15 centimetres of that spot. And he's doing this all by himself. And there was no pressure with a foreigner standing next to him videoing him. So those lit up diamond next to the 8 is where he's got to stop, and there's a mark just next to his shoulder on the window where he's got to line up with. You'll notice all the hand pointing to make sure that the driver signals that he has actually spotted that certain things are happening. Clearly, to get a result like this requires high-quality training. But it's not just about the staff. Notice the lines on the platform for passengers to line up. Without passengers cooperating, it would not be possible for many Shinkansen stops to be as short as 50 seconds. Whilst it is often said that the Japanese are efficient, punctual, and rule-abiding, I wonder how much this is natural and how much is a modern construct that has been introduced thanks to the Shinkansen and other mechanisms. You may have noticed the female conductor in the previous picture. In this one, on the right-hand side, is the lady who became the first female Shinkansen full-time driver on the Tokaido Shinkansen. This was big news. It was seen as symbolic of the changes going on in Japan, where there are greater opportunities for women and of the changes that companies and society are having to make and are going to have to make to allow for this equality. When the Shinkansen reaches its terminal, it will be cleaned, without fail. Even if the train is behind schedule and cleaning it means it will be further delayed. Of course, such events are rare, particularly as cleaning is done in just 7 minutes, as even the BBC was keen to point out in a feature article last year. As you may be able to make out just about with the scale and so on, most of the cleaners are actually female, though usually older than the ones we have seen in the previous pictures, reflecting yet other traditional Japanese working practices. The Shinkansen's influence reaches far and wide. When travelling to Japan, keep your eyes open. You never know where you will come across the Shinkansen. Sanrio, famous for Hello Kitty, even introduced a Shinkansen range. Though unlike the cat, or is it a human, the Shinkansen were drawn with a mouth. There have even been Shinkansen commemorative coins and stamps. And then, when you travel by Shinkansen, keep your eyes open. You never know what you will see. Over the years, I have seen politicians, sumo wrestlers, and a whole professional football team traveling by Shinkansen. As well as traveling it on it once, I also got lucky and saw the so-called Dr. Yellow, a train which operates at normal Shinkansen speeds, but checks for any problems with the track or overhead cables using lasers. Then out of the window, you get to see glimpses of Japan. You may see fields of green tea and the factories which help to make them ready for use. There are a number of castles which can be seen from the window of the Shinkansen. As you pass stations, you will see other passengers, such as children going on a school trip. Look out for changes in housing, traditional housing, modern housing, abandoned housing, housing that's encroaching more and more on the steep hillsides, and colourful housing. Look for differences in the rice fields throughout the year and the ever-present adverts in Japan. In the big cities, you will see skyscrapers. Factories, some of which have reflective glass, so you may even see yourself, or at least your train. These are all reflections of the real Japan. You may even see dinosaurs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris and Philip, for this wonderful talk. I'm sure the audience has lots of questions, but let me take privilege as a moderator to ask first set of questions, which is why were you interested in content tourism and Shinkansen? You probably had some. You found something in these that's distinctively, well, both Japanese and somehow academically stimulating or interesting. What are the unique elements in? Well, is it perhaps it's in Japan? I mean, about Japan, or about the content tourism, or about Shinkansen. Can you sort of touch upon that and why this is so, and perhaps what's the relevance to that to the other parts of the world?
Okay, contents tourism, why the interest? Well, it's a lot of interests coming together in one theme. It's an interest in history, it's an interest in film, it's an interest in travel. And all of those have featured in my research from the very beginning, and contents tourism just seemed to lump it all together in one very nice theme. What is the relevance for the rest of the world? Well, actually, film-induced tourism is a massive growth industry academically and for the tourism sector. We've been visiting various schools as part of our trip to the UK. This time we went to King's Cross, and there's the shopping trolley that goes into platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross. That is an example of British film-induced tourism. There's a statue of Paddington at Paddington Station. I mean, these examples are all around us now. There were massive tourism booms to...
Was Japan ahead? I mean, were we...
In terms of booms, I think the two have been going side by side in Japan and outside of Japan. But Japan is particularly interesting, and these tiger dramas are particularly interesting because we know the drama is coming. NHK makes one every year. NHK announces who the lead is going to be, who the actor/actress playing the leading character is going to be. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there is going to be a big tourism boom at any site related to that person. It's notoriously difficult to predict where a tourism boom is going to come for any other type of film or drama. But tiger dramas are the predictable version. So What it means is that Tiger dramas are one of the great case studies for looking at this phenomenon. And there have been booms related to Lord of the Rings, related to Harry Potter, related to any number of other films and dramas. The sad thing for me is that so much of the English language literature, the academic scholarship so far has ignored Asia, not just Japan, but actually Asia is one of the key sites of contents tourism. Interestingly, the fan behaviors are very similar in Japan as well as outside of Japan. So there's so much potential for cross-fertilization of the research being done about Harry Potter and about Sakamoto Ryoma, and it's one of the things that the bilingual academics in Japanese studies are trying to do, which is to bring these great ideas, concepts like contents tourism out of its original Japanese context and put it into the international scholarly discourse.
The great difference between Harry Potter and Sakamoto Ryoma is Sakamoto Ryoma is a real person, whereas Harry is. Can you artificially make a
And yeah, I mean this is breaking down within film tourism. You have fiction based on fact. You've got largely factually accurate, and then you've got complete fiction. You've got total fantasy, and there are various sort of subgenres within film tourism. But if we look at some UK examples, for example, the Tudors, I believe, precipitated large tourism booms to sites related to Henry VIII. So you actually have similar tourism going on in the UK.
Very interesting. Chris?
In terms of my interest, I guess part of this is just showing my age to some degree. When I first started traveling to Japan, it was the days before digital photography. It was still using film, and I guess from a typical trip to Japan, I was taking as many photographs in one trip as many of us now take in a single day using digital cameras. And as well as taking all the usual pictures of King Kakuji and various temples, shrines and so on around Japan, I realized when I was getting back to the UK and getting the pictures developed that I'd also taken pictures of Japanese trains. And eventually I started wondering about why that was. And I guess part of it was just sort of thinking, well, there's something clearly different about them compared to what I see in Britain. And so the academic exercise came from that in terms of trying to explore what is different, not just in terms of the engineering, but what does it reflect in terms of Japanese society? And then sort of stepping beyond that, what influence is the Shinkansen actually having on Japanese society, something which I didn't talk much about during the paper. There is a lot which I think countries can learn still from Japanese trains. Obviously, there are other countries also looking to export their systems and so on. And with Britain looking to develop its own high-speed lines, I think there are lessons that Britain could still be learning from Japan as well.
I noticed your comment that 1964, it was actually the age of motorization and aviation, and launching a brand new rail system was perhaps even an anachronism. Why, in spite of that, do you think? I think that's still relevant today. That there's still a debate around whether high-speed railroad system is going to be economically viable. And perhaps Shinkansen is more of an exception than the norm around the world. Of course, we've seen in a similar type. I mean, of course, TGV in Europe, and there's Shinkansen in Taiwan also, and there's enormous system that the Chinese have developed in the last 10 years or so. But success of these systems. TGV is probably stable now, but the success is not guaranteed. I observe. So, what are the distinct features that you see? I mean, why did that anachronism work in Japan?
I mean, the key feature in many respects, as well as the technological side, that at the time the Shinkansen was so far ahead of the game and very much needed. I mean, Japan's old railways, until the Shinkansen was opened, it took about 6.5 hours to get from Tokyo to Osaka. With the opening of the Shinkansen, this came down straight away to 4 hours and has now come down to 2 hours, 25 minutes. So it was needed to improve on the fact that the conventional railways were not good enough to some degree. But Japan's also got a very distinct advantage when it comes to high-speed intercity transport, in that you've got a number of major cities which can effectively be linked by a single line. Although not all the lines are connected, when eventually the Hokkaido Shinkansen goes all the way up to Sapporo, by sort of drawing your line across, your finger across all the different Shinkansen lines from the north to the south, you're effectively covering around about 85 to 90% of the Japanese population. To do a line like that in Britain, you would be zigzagging the whole way up. We have many more towns and small cities than, say, Japan does. One of the interesting aspects that's developing now in Japan is that the improved high-speed railway lines in Japan, as well as now the development of low-cost carriers in the aviation market, seems to be accelerating the process of emptying out the countryside. That Japanese people seem to be much more prepared to live in big cities than we would maybe see in a European context. And so it is very likely that during the lifetime of many of us in this room, that if you travel on the Shinkansen, you'll be traveling from one big city to another city, but in between you'll be looking out on almost wilderness, that the old towns and villages in between will have effectively disappeared.
And what you're saying seems to suggest that in addition to another thing you said about that probably the very high level of skills on the people who operate them, and even the passengers who are willing to go with the system, that this system is perhaps something peculiar to Japan and perhaps not a global model. Is that what you're suggesting?
It seems to be, but looking through the history books of Japanese railways, Japanese trains didn't used to be punctual. There used to be problems with the passengers' behavior and so on. So at some stage, the behavior has improved and worked. The exact timing of it is not really clear, but certainly the Shinkansen is one aspect that seems to help in this way. But many of us will have seen the difference between the culture of travelling on trains in Japan compared to Britain. If you're on a busy train in Japan, the train pulls into a station, people who want to stay on that train, if they're by the doorway, will step off onto the platform, but now stand at the front of the queue for the people wanting to get on, and the other passengers can get off. Whereas if you're on the London Underground, people by the door seem to hang on for dear life, refusing to get off this train, which is slowing down the process of people getting off the train. Meanwhile, people are shuffling down the platform because they didn't know where the doors were going to be, despite the fact the doors are in the same place every single time because these trains are a standard design.
But you also seem to suggest that even in Japan, that the system has actually made the people sort of cooperate to the system.
I think it came together. I think changes maybe in the education system, the improved information at the stations themselves, and then just particularly with the Shinkansen, the fact that there was the desire to make sure it runs on time, and therefore the passengers had to cooperate. I think just all of these things came together.
Interesting. You made us aware of. We all do this almost subconsciously. Didn't realize.
The problem is if you behave like a Japanese person on London Underground, people wondering what on earth you're doing. If you actually step off the London Underground and then turn round to be at the front of the queue to get back onto the train, people are just look at you going, what on earth was that? What are you doing?
It's also almost natural. Well, okay. Let me open the floor for questions. Anybody who wish to ask questions or make comments or whatever ways.
Hi, my question is to Chris in particular. It's about, you mentioned the UK is wanting to build high-speed rail, so HS2, and there's things we can learn from that. Could you just elaborate a bit more, because my home's not too far from it, so the HS2 line. So one would be, they say, you mentioned a lot of the lines come into Tokyo. Well, in the UK here, we're very London-centric as well. So one of the arguments is it'll spread economic growth out into the provinces like Manchester. So is that something Japan has seen, as in companies relocating to more secondary, tertiary cities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. The answer to your last part of the question is not exactly. And the trend very much now, as I was sort of suggesting in terms of the population, is it's actually the opposite is happening. I mean, particularly when the Joetsu Shinkansen was built to Niigata, part of the theory was by linking this city over on the Japan seacoast with Tokyo, companies could relocate to Niigata. If they need to visit Tokyo, it's only 2 hours away. It's easily done as a day trip. What we're actually seeing now is people saying, why don't we relocate to Tokyo? And then if we've got a reason to go back to Niigata, it can be done as a day trip. And this is actually leading to not just economic issues, but also social issues, because we're seeing the younger generation moving to Tokyo. And then, of course, they don't have the childcare that they would normally have in terms of grandparents and so on. They're not seeing the grandparents as much and this side of things. So there are implications in that respect. Britain and Japan are very different. In a number of aspects. So I don't think it's a given that if we have HS2, even if it was to eventually get extended all the way up to Scotland, that we can say it's going to be anything like what we've seen with Japan with the Shinkansen. As I said earlier, British people tend to be happier living in smaller towns and cities than the big cities on the whole, although, I mean, the population of London is broadly equivalent to central Tokyo. We do have a lot of villages and towns and so on, which obviously would not be connected by HS2. There's no guarantees we'd see the outward movement of generation. Take today's, my own experience today as another example. Despite me being here talking about trains, because of engineering works, I drove from Cardiff to London today. It was quicker to do so even if the trains had been running, and it's also cheaper for me to do it. Now my guess is, when we've got HS2, which obviously is not going to Cardiff, but if you think of an equivalent distance, yes, HS2 then should be quicker than driving, but I'm guessing it's not going to be any cheaper than the current service. One would assume there's going to be a supplementary ticket for using HS2. And in terms of HS2, the one thing that I cannot understand, and this may be yet another issue to sort of which needs to be explored, is just how expensive the construction cost is. Britain is an unbelievably expensive country, I think, these days. People have always said Japan's expensive. I think most of us, when we go to Japan, actually go to save a degree of money. On a mile-per-mile basis for construction, the HS2 construction is costing more than the linear Shinkansen, the maglev Shinkansen, which has been built between Tokyo and Nagoya, which is, of course, this train is going to be doing over 500 kilometers an hour. It's a completely new generation of transport, and yet Britain's using an old-style high-speed train, and it's going to cost more. I think somebody is making some money out of this, or Britain is just ridiculously expensive. I'm not sure, but the taxpayer's not going to do very well out of this HS2, is my guess.
Thank you. Actually, I'm not trying to give comments, but I am actually on the opposite side because I'm a senior lecturer in rail engineering at Birmingham University. We do actually teach people in doing a high-speed tool, how to design high-speed tool design. I'm a JSPS fellowship, I'm a JSPS fellow last year. I worked with University of Tokyo and RTI Tokyo to actually develop high-speed rail technology and transfer that lesson back to the UK. There's a lot of key things that, yes, I agree that people are different, culture are quite different. But the things that we have to think about carefully is the cost involved in building high-speed rail in the UK. It is because we built in 2015. Shinkansen started maybe 51 or 52 years ago. Land price, totally different. CPI index, totally different. So you have to take that into account. Second thing is, they're building the maglev from maglev from Tokyo to Nagoya. Nagoya. They actually built on the existing corridor, or the corridor they already preserved 15, maybe 20 years ago. We never have preserved those land. So we have to preserve new land. We have to build new line. So totally, the price is going to be different. But again, think what are the GDP of the UK right now? What are the growth? If you don't actually do anything now, who's going to use steel within Europe or within the UK? So we actually think about internal investment to build GDP of our country. So if you think that way, this is the investment for the long term. You think of long term, you don't think about our generation, you think about next generation. In Japan, I can say that after you build Shinkansen, JNR bankrupt, declare bankruptcy, and they actually have to they have to actually split company between JR East, JR West, JR Kyushu. So if you think about the history of Shinkansen, they actually go bankrupt before. I can say that. This is the real history. So you can go Google it or in Wikipedia. So this is the fact. So if you understand that, you have to think long term. Shinkansen become very successful after maybe 30 years or 40 years after they built it. So we have to learn that lesson. Don't take a short-term gain to actually overcome the long-term gain. So thank you.
Just to clarify my point, when I was doing the mile-for-mile cost and comparing building HS2 with the maglev, I'm not comparing with the Tokaido Shinkansen. Okay, and one of the reasons why the maglev Shinkansen is being relatively cheap to build is because most of it is being constructed underground. There's this misconception that building things underground is expensive. Yes, it's expensive, but compared to relocating people's homes and everything, it's actually cheaper to do. One of the issues with HS2, some people haven't liked it because it's going to be knocking down villages and cutting through the countryside. So why not build the whole thing underground like is done in Japan? And again, if we use maglev technology, I mean, the journey time from London to Birmingham would be 12 minutes. Okay, just to put it into perspective, what sort of speeds we're talking about at that in that respect. I personally do think we need something like HS2. We need higher speed railways, partly to actually improve the lines for commuters. What Britain needs in many areas is actually improvements to the commuter lines, but because of the amount of headway that needs to be given to express trains, we can't put on extra commuter services, so we need to get the express trains out of the way, and the best way to do this is to build a brand new line. I'm just not sure that we're getting it at the best price at the moment.
Philip, can you comment on the rail system and the tourism is a very close relationship, and can you comment on that?
Well, specifically in the context of the Tiger dramas, at the end of each Tiger drama, they've got a little section about sites that have been featured in the dramas and how you get to them. And as it is with an apartment advertisement, it's always how many minutes walk from which train station. And so, the train network is very highly integrated into the whole idea of getting out and doing some contents tourism and day tripping in particular is something that these dramas encourage, and a lot of that day tripping is being done on the trains.
You sort of almost mentioned that making a location too convenient actually deprives the attractive, or the economic impact of tourism.
The basic philosophy of developing a tourism sector is that you want to get people to sleep there, because when they sleep there, they're paying, well, in London, we talk about expensive, trying to find places to stay this time. Your yen doesn't get very far in a hotel, which is all great business for the hoteliers and the local tourism industry. So if you think of a day trip, you might pay a few hundred yen, a few thousand yen on trains, and then you just return home having paid a couple of thousand yen on lunch. And then if you're doing an overnight trip, then you're paying the couple of thousand yen for dinner plus a few beers or whatever your drink is, and you're staying in a hotel and you're adding in all sorts of other extras. So the aim of tourism operators is to have an inconvenient transport system in as far as it actually makes people go there for 2 or 3 days.
Interesting. Maybe at the back.
Hi, thank you very much for your really interesting talks. My question relates to film-induced tourism. I would like to know, where are these tourists coming from? Are they mainly domestic tourists? Are they from other Asian countries, or are they from further afield from the West and so on? So it sort of relates back to who the fans are of the TV shows. And for example, if you're watching the drama in the UK, are you going to go all the way from the UK to Japan just because of a TV drama?
Okay. Yeah, great question, because motivations and fan behaviors are absolutely central to film-induced tourism. In the case of tiger dramas, unless these dramas are actually being broadcast outside of Japan, of course they're going to find it very difficult to induce tourism by non-Japanese. But what we're finding increasingly is that Japanese films are getting sold worldwide. Many people here will doubtless have seen the odd anime, and they are inducing a lot of tourists to sacred sites, as they're called nowadays. And if you actually go to the JNTO website, the tourism organization website, you'll actually see maps telling anime fans how they can get to their favorite sacred sites. So it really depends on the particular film, drama, manga, anime, etc., that is inducing the tourism, and there's a big spread there. Are people traveling internationally to do it? I'd say perhaps there are some real hardcore fans of particular anime in particular who will travel internationally to do it, but we see it more as a genre of tourism now. When people go to Japan, they have their checklist of things that they'd like to do. Yes, I'd like to see a temple. Yes, I'd like to spend some time in Kyoto. Yes, I want to have ramen. And yes, I'd like to do something related to anime. And it's just going to be part of the standard tourism itinerary. And it's not going to be, are we definitely going to see something about Detective Conan? There'll be lots of people who haven't heard of Detective Conan, but they happen past the museum and they go in and they say, yep, I've done my Japanese pop culture bit for my trip this time. So motivations within this field are actually really complicated, and there's a lot more research to be done.
Wouldn't you say perhaps that it's going to even influence the way people make contents?
Yes, this is another thing that we're really seeing. So, for example, why was Yae no Sakura made in 2013? This is a drama about Nijima Yae. If you go to the Doshisha booth later, and ask about Nijima Yae, I'm sure they'll give you a nice answer. She's the wife of the founder of that university. Why was that particular drama made in 2013? Because after the March 11th tragedy in 2011, NHK thought, well, how can we help out the Tohoku region? And one way you can help out Tohoku is to induce a tourism boom to Aizu Wakamatsu, which is where Nijima Yae spends a lot of her childhood, and she takes part in the battle for the defense of Aizu Wakamatsu Castle. And that's what NHK thought it could do to help out Tohoku in the wake of the disaster. So we also see what you might call location placement. So these are municipalities who are bidding for their scenery, their sites, to be featured in upcoming anime features, so that fans of those anime will then go to that particular sacred site. However, there's a real balancing act to be done here, because if it's too obvious, if it's too commercialized, people will start thinking kimochiwari, that's pretty just commercialized, unpleasant. In the same way as if you're watching a movie and you see some famous actor holding up a Coke and saying, wow, this is good, I mean, you're just going to go, bleh. And we're going to get the same sort of issue with location placement in movies if we're not careful. So there's that sort of fine balancing act between making your location available to companies, hoping that there'll be a boom, but at the same time not overly promoting it to make people turn off.
I guess the question was in terms of internationalization. I can tell from my sort of personal experience is that some of the many Japanese women go to Korea to visit some of the soap opera, love scene kinds of places.
Yep.
So, the tourism in Asia is booming. I mean, the market is expanding very dramatically, and I guess the question is perhaps that might induce the content producers to.
There is all sorts of international tourism going on now. We've got fan conventions throughout the world. So, we've got Taiwanese people traveling within Taiwan to get to Japanese contents events. We've got Taiwanese people coming to Japan to take part in the international cosplay competitions and so on. I mean, there are so many examples, but this research, breaking out in the English language I'm talking about here. This research is just at the very beginning of breaking out of this sort of Anglo-Saxon centric, Anglo-American centric view of the world that has Hollywood as the only place that's producing contents that can induce tourism. What I personally think is that the contents market within East Asia is going to be over the next 10 to 20 years where most of the interesting intellectual and also business innovations are actually going to be coming. So watch this space.
Great. Wow. Okay. Well, why don't we continue this? I mean, innovation. Where do you see the innovation coming from?
I think the innovation exists on a number of levels. I mean, in terms of contents tourism, what Japanese scholars have done is to shift the focus of attention away from the form of media that is telling the story, i.e. away from film, away from books, and they're shifting it more towards the narratives and characters. And that's something that Japanese scholars have really taken in the lead in. And now a lot of the leading English-speaking academics are really coming round to this idea. So in terms of academic innovation, Japanese scholars have come up with some really great ideas. In terms of like production values, obviously Japanese anime and filmmaking is technically brilliant, and there are many extremely talented people producing these, and they're innovating, digital content and computer enhancement and these sorts of things all of the time. So, for example, we now have a lot of backdrops in anime films actually being recreated, touched up from actual digital photographs of places. So we're almost getting into a crossover between live action and anime, and that's a very interesting trend within production. In terms of tourism behavior, we're also having, or fan behavior, innovations are coming in the way that fans are actually taking contents, remaking them, reproducing them on their phones, on their computers, and sharing them in online communities, fan-produced YouTube movies. All of these sorts of areas are where creativity is just sort of bursting out from everywhere you can see it, and yeah.
If I could add in there, the rail and aviation companies don't want to miss out on any of this, as well as gaining from the transport that's going on within Japan, so people can get to some of these sites. Some of the companies are taking it one step further. JR West, I showed the picture earlier on of their 500 series Shinkansen. Some of these have now been completely repainted into sort of green and purple colours to reflect a rocket ship from a particular anime manga whose name I can't remember, but they've stripped out the whole of the front carriage so that you can go in there and pretend that you're driving the train and experience different things from the storylines of these anime and manga. So the train experience itself, there seems to be many passengers who are literally just travelling on it to do that. They're not even worried about where the train's going to anymore. They go on the train as part of the contents tourism.
Great. Are you sure there's no other question? Oh, okay.
Hello there. Hello, hi there again. My name is Daniel Elson. I'm a PhD student at UCL. But my sort of question is, well, you're sort of driving tourism to certain places not to generate money for a local economy and basically these things. It's just the examples that pop into my head. I follow Formula One myself, and I've done the Suzuka Grand Prix in Nagoya, and that was an example of it done well, that they deliberately put a racetrack out of the way and then generated money for that region. But the example that comes into my mind as well, that this has failed quite a lot within the Formula One. So the Korean Grand Prix is an example where the government deliberately put it in an out-of-the-way area to make it awkward. So he would have to stay there, so they'd have to spend more money, generate more money for the economy, and that's no longer on the calendar. That's absolutely failed. As part of your research, yes, you're noticing the trends that are happening. Are you yourself looking at the effects of now trying to put it into it, that you're not actually capturing the entirety of the phenomena, that if you force people to do something, that they end up won't want to do it?
There is a considerable difference between the example that you've given and the example that I'm talking about, in that Formula One racetracks are appealing to Formula One fans, and they're not going to expect people who are not Formula One fans to go and visit that site. If you've got let's say, Kochi. Kochi is not only advertising itself as a Sakamoto Ryoma site. You're going to have the famous katsuo, which is the local delicacy to eat. People are going to go and stay in an onsen. Kochi as a region will also advertise its outdoors. So the site is much more diversified in terms of the experiences that tourists can get. So let's take your family of 4 that is going to Kochi for 2 or 3 days. You're perhaps going to have the kids going to the Anpanman Museum, and you're going to have perhaps dad going to the Ryoma Museum because he's been watching the drama, and you've got mum going and seeing something else within the city, whether it's the gastronomy sites or whatever. People within a family who've got their typical 2-3 day holiday are going to include contents tourism in there. That's why the overnight trip can take place, because it's a much more diversified site. So that's where I'd see the difference being. But we are seeing a lot of solo travelers, and I think the people that do go to those Formula One sites will be the really dedicated fans. The question then is, how big is your dedicated fan base? And if you're talking about a lot of these sacred sites, the dedicated fan base itself will be really small, and there are lots of examples of interesting contents tourism related to a particular anime, but it's not at a level that allows the municipality to actually turn it into any kind of major money-making revenue. It's kind of like the Hino example, where the revenues are simply not big enough to register. I know you're a Formula One fan, Chris. So
I think I got to jump in on this one as somebody else who enjoys Formula One and the World Endurance Championship. I think Suzuka is a little bit of an unusual case in some respects, even within Japan. I mean, there are a number of other circuits in Japan which have been used either for Formula One or for IndyCar racing. I've been to Motegi, which is unbelievably difficult to get to by public transport. Once you've got to the local station, there are no bus services, even additional bus services put on for people to get from the train station to the circuit on the day. You have to take a taxi, costs around about 12,000 yen to take the taxi. It's that far away. Aida was used once for a Formula One race, was never used again because people complained how difficult it was to get to. So I think it's a little bit unusual. Suzuka is a very special circuit. Most drivers say it's one of their favourite in the world, and that's partly why Suzuka does well. But of course, none of these circuits, I would say, has many people going there usually by public transport, because quite often people are going in groups. And in most countries, once you've got a few of you per person, it works out cheaper to be paying to go by car than it does to go by public transport. It's just you've got horrible queues of traffic getting in and out. And virtually all of these circuits are in the middle of nowhere to some degree. Suzuka's that little bit closer to Nagoya, but they don't have big motorways on the whole going straight to the doorstep. So there are issues there. So I think it's difficult to do an international comparison. And as popular as Suzuka is with drivers, we don't see many international fans going there yet. Hopefully that will change though one day.
Thank you very much. Before concluding, can you each give like 30 seconds comment on why, what to look for in international studies and the attractiveness of it and why they should go to Japan? If you would.
Do you want to go first?
I'm prepared to go first on that one, partly because I actually referred to this almost in the conclusion of my chapter, Japan, the Basics. I would say part of the starting point is what are your hobbies? What are your interests? One of the things that's frustrated me over the years, there are a number of people who I come across in Japan, particularly on things like the JET program, who, because they're in Japan, suddenly decide that they're going to take up flower arranging or the tea ceremony. And I ask them, do you have an interest in flowers? No. So why are you doing it? Because it's traditional Japan. It's just like, no, forget about it. Okay? Whatever your interests are, you are likely to find an equivalent in Japan. You can find Formula One, you can find football, but anybody who's been to a Japanese football match will know that the way football is supported in Japan is not quite what you would expect on a typical Saturday afternoon in Britain. So go with your own personal interests and see what the Japanese version is of it. That would be my main recommendation for you.
And my main recommendation is go with a sense of not, how is this different, but how is this similar? What is it that joins us together? Because there's this discourse surrounding Japan that it's somehow unique and different, and yes, everybody's unique and everybody's different. So go with an attitude of what connects us. We need to find our connections in this world. We've had, horrible events yesterday in Paris. We need to find ways to connect with each other more sensitively. And when you go to Japan, have that in mind, I think.
Well, perhaps if I may talk a little bit about my own experience studying abroad, which I did. But I think by going abroad and looking at what's different and what's similar, you probably understand yourself better, and perhaps get answer to what kind of rail system you should build in the UK. Hopefully. But thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel to Philip and Chris for the fascinating talk. Thank you very much. So this concludes this session.